if we could just go a little bit deeper on the Democrats and what's going on there.
It's a massive rebuke of the establishment. It's a massive rebuke of woke totalitarianism, one of the most significant political revolutions in American history.
You're one of the prominent free speech activists and journalists in America. Surely this is outrageous to you.
We have a backlog of abuses of power and scandals that we've only seen the traces of.
What's happening within mainstream media? Is it redeemable? Like, is it over? Is this the end?
You do get a sense that this change here is going to have significant ripple effects. America is back, and it's back in a big way.
What happened in that year?
If everybody's getting their information from three big corporations, and those corporations are essentially captured, it's absolutely terrifying. It's 1984.
I just watched Kamala's speech.
How was it?
There's something weird about it, which is...
The other big event, of course, is just the absolute fracturing of the news media, the open disinformation. We're going to see big changes on everything.
Well, before you hear from Michael, I ask, if you want to support the show, all you have to do is press subscribe. If you press subscribe, I can have more phenomenal guests like Michael discussing the issues that you want to hear about. But without further ado, Michael Shellenberger. Michael Shellenberger, it's the morning after Trump, it seems, has achieved a landslide in the 2024 presidential election. Not only has he won the White House, he is on the verge of getting the popular vote. He is on the verge, it seems, of also capturing the House of Representatives. And he also took the Senate, which was predicted somewhat. So we thought that. But we did not necessarily see such a mandate being given by the American people to the former and future President Trump. What are your first thoughts on it, or what do you make of it?
I mean, it's incredible. It's definitely one of the most significant political revolutions in American history. Definitely the most significant since the post-1964 Civil Rights Act, where you saw Southern Democrats becoming Republicans. It's a massive rebuke of the establishment. It's a massive rebuke of woke totalitarianism, by which we mean this hyper-political correctness, this radical leftism, the identity politics. It decisively puts to an end any claims that the Republican Party is a party of white supremacy or of whites. We saw an increase of whites for the Democrat candidate Kamala Harris. We saw an increase of Latino and Black support for Trump. That's after 8 years of relentless media narrative about Trump being a white supremacist and a racist. So it's difficult to overstate the significance of the moment. Obviously, I think, or maybe not obviously, every societal institution is still dominated by this awful woke ideology, but it's just the fact that they have the popular vote too, that they're going to have a larger popular vote. The moral significance of it it's sort of incalculable. There's something, it's going to push back at like
the moral significance.
Moral significance. It's a disapproval by the public of the establishment. It's an absolute rebuke. And I just, I talked about it briefly today, but I mean, I woke up this morning just feeling a sense of relief. It took me a minute to figure out what it was. I had a positive feeling. We had a positive feeling last night, and I was trying to figure out what exactly was it. And my friend and co-author Alex Gutentag, we talked about it. We realized it was catharsis, and catharsis is relief from an incredible amount of tension, stress. It comes from the Greek of the experience of watching a Greek tragedy, and then it resolves itself, and you kind of realize, I'm grateful for my life because I'm not a victim of this tragedy. That's how I felt. I just felt like this thing that we have been that has affected us personally. I mean, so many of us, you, obviously, me, Alex, millions of us have been suffering under this totalitarianism. We've lost friends. We've lost, it's damaged our relationships. We saw good people behave in absolutely mad ways, engaging in witch hunt kind of activities. And it's absolutely a repudiation of that by the people of the United States. It's so deeply satisfying at a level where I was very happy when Obama got elected. I was a huge Obama fan, but this feels in many ways much more profound.
I've got to ask you about that. So it's almost odd that you would hear that from a journalist, but you are, I guess, one of the leading journalists on the counter-populist democratic establishment nefarious behavior. And So you have been, I interpret what you're saying you've just been exhausted and constantly reporting on this various censorship. Of course, you're a leading journalist in the Twitter files, something we've discussed on a previous show. Why is this a relief? I mean, liberal listeners will think, what on earth is he talking about? Trump is the one who's a threat to free speech and threat to democracy. And how would you explain the difference? And why is this a relief for you that it's the Democrats? But we're going into now a MAGA presidency.
Well, and to be fair, I'm as surprised by my emotional reaction as others, and I want to be honest about it. I also did not take a position on the presidential election. I did not vote for a presidential candidate. I didn't because I'm really old-fashioned in my journalism right now. You make a public commitment like that, and it does warp some of your coverage, and I didn't want it to be warped. But I also have an obligation to be honest about my feeling. And I'm not just a journalist. I'm also an advocate for free speech. I'm a fierce opponent of gender medical mistreatment and the medicalization of puberty and natural human processes. And I'm sickened by the ways in which this beautiful anti-racialist movement that in some ways has occupied the center stage of the moral vision of the United States since the 60s has just been so perverted and deformed by wokeism that, I think I'm surprised by the sense of relief. I'm surprised by my level of satisfaction at the rebuke of it. I think that there's more to talk about. There's some complexity around the nationalism and the populism. But what I'm struck by is the repudiation of what I think is a very sinister and totalitarian ideology that I saw turn many people that I'm very close to or was very close to behaving in ways that were absolutely appalling. And I think it's vindicating. It's a sense in which we were not the abnormal ones, and the majority was also as sick of it as we were.
I want to come to the totalitarian nature of the Democratic establishment under Biden, but I guess just to push back, if I may, it seems the exit polls suggest that the main reason people voted as they did was to save democracy. That was the most popular reason. Now, the way I've understood that is that both sides thought democracy was on the line.
Right.
So if you tally it up, it kind of make sense like that.
Yes.
If you look at young women, it's Roe v. Wade.
Right.
Here's another paradox of the election, as far as I've seen it, is that young women are voting Democrat because of Roe v. Wade, but it seems that conservative women or other women, white women, went for Trump because they wanted. They were upset with Title IX, or you have to explain Title IX to me. It's not something I fully understand. There were other aspects of women's spaces being impeached on. There's a weird gender mix that we saw through this whole election. But there's the point I'm trying to make is there are various reasons why people voted a certain way. Now you make this point. It's a rebuke of the totalitarian nature of woke culture, you might call it. But just on this main topic of democracy being online, like being against democracy, Kamala regularly said Trump was a threat to democracy. Elon Musk at length has said if the Republicans don't win this one, there'll never be democracy in America again. What do you make of that from coming from either side? Do you believe both sides when they say that, or neither side?
Well, it's a very good question. So first of all, we should take all exit polling with a grain of salt because often people don't know why they make the decisions that they make. And there's all sorts of ways in which scientists try to figure out what really motivated people versus what they say motivated them. I think we saw for a lot of voters, the economy and inflation and immigration were top issues. But I think your interpretation of just the literal fact of democracy being on the ballot, both sides feel like the other side is ending democracy. I personally think it is very asymmetrical. We did not see the Republicans trying to incarcerate their political opponents. We did not see, for the most part, Republicans putting in place a censorship industrial complex or engaging in these incredible abuses of power like we saw with the FBI and the Hunter Biden laptop. So I think there's been this is to come back to the democracy part. The other big event, of course, is just the absolute fracturing of the news media.
Yep.
The loss of credibility of the news media, the open disinformation that they did, And then the very last minute, Joe Rogan coming in, giving this endorsement to Trump, and that itself becoming national news.
I mean, what a ride. We haven't even mentioned these 2 assassination attempts. There's rumors of a third.
Right.
I mean, this whole story is the biggest drama in politics, certainly in my lifetime. I imagine of any since the war. But can we just, before moving on from the democracy thing, if you watch the Winston Marshall Show, you'll be quite aware of the many dangers of big tech and government censorship. Using the internet without ExpressVPN would be like trusting Kamala Harris without a teleprompter. Or Joe Biden with one.
So, end of quote. Repeat the line.
Every time you connect to an unencrypted network, whether you're at home or in public, you're basically opening the door for a hacker to help themselves to your personal data. Hacking doesn't even require much know-how, just a bit of cheat kit and AI. But here's where it gets serious. Hackers can rake in up to $1,000 by selling your information. You willing to take that risk? ExpressVPN creates a secure, encrypted fortress between your device and the internet. It would take a supercomputer over 1 billion years to crack ExpressVPN's encryption. That's not just secure. That's Hadrian's Wall in digital form. Sure, as the English Channel has protected us in Britain from invasion for 1,000 years, so too ExpressVPN will protect you. And it couldn't be simpler to use. Fire up the app, press one button, and boom, you're protected. And it works on all your devices. My favorite thing about ExpressVPN is that I'm able to access international geo-block content and platforms. As you know, X was recently banned in Brazil. Rumble is banned in France. With ExpressVPN, that is not a problem. In an increasingly censorious world with ExpressVPN, I have nothing to worry about. Secure your online data today with ExpressVPN and get 3 extra months free by visiting expressvpn.com/Winston. And by supporting sponsors of this show, I remind you, you are supporting this show also. So on the one side, I think this is an important part because Republicans voting for democracy, I interpret that as the censorship for them is seen as a threat to their democracy because all Americans know democracy without free speech is not democracy. On the other hand, the Democrats see what Trump did and not accepting the election results in 2020 as a serious problem. Yep. What do you make of that, of Trump not accepting the election? Are you worried about that behavior?
No, I'm not at all. I mean, so my view is that Trump has pushed the limit much further, I would say, than other candidates had in the past in questioning the legitimacy of elections. But you have to remember that when you go see, people can go see these supercuts of Hillary Clinton and Stacey Abrams and John Kerry and Al Gore, all similarly calling their defeats illegitimate.
Russia.
And then, of course, the greatest part of it was the Russia collusion hoax, which suggested that it was the Russians who got Donald Trump elected and that he had cut some sort of secret deal, which was the most delegitimizing disinformation campaign that we've seen around elections. So for me, no, there was never, January 6th was a failure of security. We know that Nancy Pelosi, she admitted on film now that she should have called in, agreed to bring in the National Guard. We have the Capitol Police who said the same thing.
The Capitol Police said it was Pelosi.
The Capitol Police said that he had specifically requested National Guard backup and had been refused by Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell. And then she admitted on film later that was the case. You have to also remember that we now know that there was like around 200 at least confidential human sources working for different federal agencies, FBI and others. There's we can't prove, but we have good reason to believe. What's that?
At the storming of the Capitol.
Yeah, at January 6th. We can't exactly prove, but we have a lot of reason to believe that the storming was instigated by agent provocateur. So
like Ryan Epps would be that.
Yeah, I mean that was the person that everybody looked at, and of course he's denied it and everybody denies it. But we still have not done a proper investigation of January 6th. We haven't of Hunter Biden's laptop, of COVID origins. We have a backlog of abuses of power and scandals that we've only seen the traces of. We haven't properly had the Congress hasn't had the power to go in and really look at it. The Senate is going to have more power, and obviously the executive branch has these documents. I mean, the list goes on. I mean, it's a range of different scandals that need to be looked at, need to be investigated. So I mean, we are absolutely at a cleavage, a hinge moment in history. It's very similar to the mid-'70s when in 1975 we had this thing called the Church Committee hearing. That's when we learned the CIA was involved in mind control, poisonings, assassinations, and all sorts of other, mischief.
Is this the Red Scare?
No, 75 is it's really after Watergate, and so you have Republicans are very weakened by Watergate. Democrats have control in the Senate, and there's a committee run by a senator named Frank Church, and he's the one. And the CIA, and they also, I believe at the time it was Ford, tells the CIA to cooperate and puts a new director in the CIA, William Colby, who also is a mandate to reveal these really terrible secrets from the CIA that had been accumulating over the previous 30 years. So it's been 50 years. I mean, the distance between World War II and 1975 was only 30 years. It's been 50 years since 1975. So there is a lot of pent-up demand and need for serious investigations. But I think, it's working at multiple levels. What's going on? We see a political realignment. We see a completely fragmented media breaking apart and actually opening the way to this victory. You see a moral repudiation of the establishment. You see a kind of changing of international relations, our relationship to Europe, our relationship to Japan. So it's of just gigantic consequence. It's like so many different things are concentrated in a single moment.
So let's focus on one of them, which is this moral repudiation of woke culture. I guess you might lump it all together, although that might not be a useful term. But they include excesses of trans ideology, which I don't know as well about it. I know the British version, but I don't know the American version.
We did WPATH files together,
of course, and that's I guess part of it. The way women's rights have been eroded as part of that. What else within woke ideology is tied up into it? I mean, you made an observation to me last night, which is that Kamala, they talked a little bit about her being black or Indian, but they didn't really lean into identity in the ways that they have done for the last 20 years. So,
that's right.
So it doesn't seem like a repudiation of identitarianism, because the Democrats didn't really engage in it like they used to.
Well, I mean, in a sense, it's even more of a repudiation, because my point last night was that even if Kamala had won, it wasn't winning on identity politics, and that she was running away from identity politics. She was accusing Trump of playing identity politics, engaging in identity politics. Remember, she had a big opportunity to say, "I'd be the first black woman. I'd be the first woman." She didn't do that. She said, in fact, every time a reporter would ask her that, she would resist it. If I had to put all of these bad things that have been happening at a cultural and political level, I would summarize it in 3 words: abuses of power. And we saw cancel culture emerge. So cancel culture, nobody could see it at the time, of course, they didn't know the future. Cancel culture became formal censorship. The censorship industrial complex is really the creation of 2 distinct threads. One of them is the deep state. It's this reaction from the counter-populist deep state to Trump and to Brexit, and then we see the Duterte in Philippines and Bolsonaro in Brazil. But the other part of it is just wokeism, like the people that are actually involved in demanding censorship have that similar puritanical, great awakening mentality that they need to decide what is said online to prevent, real world harm, and they should be decided by committees of experts. It's a fundamentally elitist, authoritarian ideology, and it's both coming from within the state and also coming from within the society. And the media, has been driving both of them, and it's created. I mean, really, if you look at these famous graphs that Zach Goldberg published in Tablet, he's a Manhattan Institute fellow, and he just looked at the frequency of the words racist and white supremacy being used in the media. It clearly starts in 2013, maybe a little bit before then, but 2013 is the first Black Lives Matter. That's the first time Black Lives Matter becomes a movement, 2013. So if you kind of go, what period of time are we looking at here? Because I think that you can certainly trace these things back to political correctness in the 90s. You can trace it back to radical leftism in the 60s and then maybe the 30s even. But if you just go, there is something very different about the last 10 years. I mean, the last 10 years was when that intolerant radical leftism that we call wokeism, it was at that moment that it really started to affect liberals and people that were at least liberals or in liberal circles, in Democratic Party circles. So you see, it's really created, wokeism was its own destruction, because it just widened the number of victims to such a point. You started getting people like Elon Musk affected because his child, was trans. Bill Ackman, because he's, a Jewish supporter of Harvard and was, like many American Jews, was sick of seeing Jews not treated like a marginalized class, even as they were becoming victims of anti-Semitism. So I just think you start to see a kind of the number of the people fed up with this grew and grew and grew, and it extended to the broader society. It's not just an elite phenomenon.
Can I focus in on 2013?
Yeah.
And this tablet report that you cited earlier. It's quite a curious date, 2013, for this to come to begin, because this is obviously before Trump, his first nomination. You say it's when Black Lives Matter, the organization, was founded or emerged. It can't be as simple as that, because also Black Lives Matter, it didn't come in a vacuum. It was animated by some spirit that existed in America, unless it was just totally activist and astroturfed movement. What do you think happened in 2013 within the mainstream media that this sort of erupted? Because it wasn't just terms like racist, it was homophobic, all the phobics, all of these emerged. I've seen the same report. All the homophobic, Islamophobic, everything phobic. What happened in that year?
Well, I think it's important. It is a really important point, because I do think it's easier to kind of pinpoint the craziness as 2016 when Trump was elected. But we have good data showing that it starts earlier than that. As for everything in the world, there's multiple causes. Clearly, one of them is, a kind of millennials coming to be of greater power. I guess the first millennials are at that point, in their early 30s, 31, 32, since the oldest millennials was 8. Now they're 40, they're up to 43 years old now, if you start in 1981. So they start to come into their own. There's such a big, they had been raised in many ways on this politically correct woke ideology. Then they get social media. So we get social media really, Twitter is, really, I guess, 2000, I want to say 2005, but it really doesn't get kind of going in a mass way, and especially for journalists, until the 2010. I mean, I had also heard that I have another source that just told me for the book that, because we're always trying to be like, certainly when you're within a year or two, when does it really start? But we know Occupy Wall Street, there was people there that were talking about white privilege and, stuff that I had even heard in the 90s. I mean, you can trace these things are always much older, but it's clearly some inflection, because when you look at the graphs, it's a sharp rise up.
Yeah.
I think Obama also deserves responsibility and some culpability for this. He kind of comes to office saying, I want to transcend racialism. I think part of the reality is that the Democrat coalition, at least before now, depended on 90% black support. Well, if you're 90% black support, it's going to be a lot harder to get 95% than it is to go down to 85%. And what we saw is, at least for black men, it went down to, I believe it's now 80%, if I'm not mistaken, that as opposed to 90%. So it may be that they figured that they really needed to play the race card in order to maintain black support for Democrats, as well as to try to win Latino support. But obviously it didn't hold. So I think there's multiple things going on. There's probably a political motive. There's probably a genuinely sort of cultural motive. And then I think that social media, the anxiety that's created, the need to show that I'm good and virtue signal, so to speak.
Yeah.
I think all those things came to bear in that period.
I wouldn't mind just prodding on Obama, because like you, he's someone I really admired, and I remember his books, reading them. I remember being in America when he was first elected and being genuinely excited. And he could have been the populist leader. He could have quelled the populist spirit. I really believe he came in just after the Wall Street crash, 2008, and he really had the bankers over a barrel, but he didn't act. And I do think that Trump emerged because of his failures there. But not only that, he was always pushing identitarianism, but even in his support for Kamala Harris in the last few days, not only did he continue pushing identitarianism, talking about, Jewish voters or Muslim voters having to vote his way or against Trump, but he was also lying, like explicit lies. I was like, he lost all credibility for me, because before this moment, I think I was like, oh, I just disagree with him. But now I've lost respect for him, because he lied about Trump.
You mean the fine people on both sides?
Fine people on both sides hoax, which Trump did not say that. He's not include the white supremacists on that. He's explicit in condemning them.
Yes.
But also, what was the other one? He said there was another lie. I think maybe it was Project 2025, or it was one of these. Maybe it was an abortion thing. It was just another explicit lie. If it wasn't Obama, it was one of those types. But anyway, I lost my respect for Obama. What do you make on him as an individual? I mean, it's a small detail, I guess.
Of course, he's very disappointing, and I think there's a lot there. But I mean, I think that, I think what we saw is a political animal, and that the race, that race baiting works. for a significant number of people, or at least it has worked for a lot of people. I think it's obviously diminished utility. But remember, he also got up and played this. He accused black men of sexism for not supporting Kamala Harris in the numbers they wanted. So, I mean, at the point where you've got people kind of shaming, people.
He was shaming the quote unquote brothers.
Yeah,
for
exactly.
not voting the right
that's
way.
right. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So obviously, it must work at some level, and so that's why they're doing it. But no, I think he absolutely disgraced himself there. It's an interesting thing because the other thing that was going on, of course, is that Obama, Pelosi, and Schumer were the ones that went and reportedly, and it sounds I haven't heard any counter reporting to it,
And Clooney.
yeah, and George Clooney, of course. When are the ones that really got Biden to step down? They, we had heard that Obama wanted Senator Mark Kelly, the former astronaut and senator from Arizona, to be the candidate. But either way, they wanted an open primary. Well, they didn't get an open primary because Kamala Harris's people waged a PR campaign, including the New York Times, saying it would be racist and sexist for there to be an open primary rather than just having her anointed by President Biden. So the Shakespearean quality of this, they die by their own sword. Right. So they she's someone that rose to power through wokeism, through playing the racial and sex card. She got herself into that position, and it ends up, you end up with an exceedingly weak Democrat candidate. I mean, she was an awful candidate.
You don't think she's a competent Attorney General of California? You don't think she's a brilliant, bright woman?
I don't. I think it's obviously she's not bright. She doesn't even really know who she is. Like when they would say, "Why are you running?" She said, "Because I trust the American people." No, you need to say why you're running and like what motivates you. You need to have a vision. She didn't have any of that. Like it's amazing because of course the left has always had this vision of Republicans as what they call the one-dimensional man. The person that really there's nothing there. They're just surface and superficiality. That's what we saw with Kamala Harris. I mean, this is somebody who behaves, in one hand, very viciously with the attacks to get where she's at, but then she acts kind of unprepared. Her finest moment was the debate with Trump, which I think she really clearly won and she was very prepared for, but she couldn't sustain that level of preparedness in any of the subsequent interviews. So I think, one question for the Trump, for Trump and Republicans is, it was, it turned out not to be very close, but it looks like, but nonetheless, like you would think it should have been a blowout when you have a candidate like Kamala who is as weak as she was.
Well, what's interesting is that at time of recording now, he seems to have roughly the same amount of votes that he won last time. He's about 72 million. He had about 75 million last time. Biden won with, Kamala's down 14 million votes lower than what Biden had. So where did those 14 million votes go? That's one thing about the demographics I don't understand.
Well, I think it's mostly explained by ballot harvesting and the mail-in ballots. There's a bunch of states that got rid of the mail-in, ballots during COVID. It was mandated. It was mandatory to have mail-in ballots. So what people don't know, a lot of people don't know that ballot harvesting is legal in the United States. In other words, you can go and walk on the doors in a big housing project or apartment complex. And, if it's a housing complex where we think most of the voters are going to be Democrats, you just go there and you knock on their doors. You go, "You got a ballot here. I'll sit with you while you fill it out. And then I'm going to take it and make sure it gets to because you would think it'd be so simple to just fill it out. But no, we know that you have to, that's what they mean by ballot harvesting. So yeah, that definitely explains it. And you can see why there's been so much debate over whether or not to have mail-in ballots require ID.
Why didn't they ballot harvest this time then?
Well, because it wasn't required in a bunch of states after 2020 changed the rules so that you couldn't do that. And a big priority for Republican states was to get rid of mail-in ballots for precisely the reason that we're seeing.
Right. Okay. So that's
they say, and so people use language of precisely. They'll say things like, 2020 election was rigged because of the Hunter Biden laptop and the mail-in ballots and the ballot harvesting. It sounds like something. This was before we know that the activities of the Hunter Biden thing were illegal, but certainly ballot harvesting, mail-in ballots was not illegal in 2020. It became prohibited by a number of states.
Can I go back to the dramatic Shakespearean nature of the coup in the Democrat establishment? Right. Now, what the rumor I heard was a little bit different to what you just explained or described, was that Biden, as an act of revenge for being ousted, was like, you know what, I'm going to get my nomination. I'm going to put Kamala in before anyone else can put their names forward. And actually, if you look at the time when people came out to support Kamala, it does suggest that the Obamas were not ready for a Kamala nomination. Do you think there's any credence to this?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly sounds plausible, and if that's the case, then that's sufficient to explain the whole thing. In other words, she's very disciplined. I mean, like Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, these guys are very disciplined about never ever suggesting there was anything. I mean, she was, you got to hand it to her in all the interviews she did. She just kept insisting that everything was fine with Biden and that she was completely loyal. So there was no way he would never see any potential undermining of him when she was vice president and she was super strong. So it may be also that he felt that he owed her something. I mean, it's the party, it's always, all parties have that level of discipline, where there's a hierarchy and you have to respect the person above you and whatever. But I think a party in particular, like the Democrats, where there weren't factions, there weren't people that were, fighting with each other really at that level. So it may just have been loyalty, that he just felt loyal to her, or it could have been a form of revenge or a little bit of both. We don't know.
I wonder if we could just go a little bit deeper on the Democrats and what's going on there exactly. This is obviously a terrible defeat for them. What can we expect from them going forward? I just watched Kamala's speech saying that she accepts the results.
What did you think? How was it?
It was a good speech, fair play to her.
Good.
And
she was conciliatory, I take it, and gracious.
She said she'd accept the results, hand over and help Trump in the next stages. So
the good news for everybody is that it was decisive, and in the popular vote, it's hard to overstate the importance of having that popular vote because the way that Democrats get out of having to clean house or take a hard look at their own role in their defeat was by just blaming the Electoral College. Of course, it's silly because there's no way that that's ever going to change. But the popular vote, it does provide that moral repudiation. You would think it wouldn't matter whether something is right or wrong by how many people say it's right or wrong. But of course, it does matter. And there's consequences now politically for getting yourself on the wrong side of this stuff. So I just think the Democrats are going to they're going to have to figure out, because I think the important thing to also understand is only a third of the American people have college degrees, four-year college degrees. 2/3 do not. So you can't you can't cede the working class to your opponents. The Democrats are going to have to compete for the working class. I think that they're going to run away from the identity politics now and the wokeism, and that means that you're going to actually hopefully get some sort of proper debate about what we need to be doing around things like, the border and also education, which is a complete disaster. I mean, the reading and math proficiencies have just been totally hammered by COVID. We're not properly educating our children. So, I mean, there's like some serious issues we need to. We have this huge debt where just servicing the debt is more than we spend on the military every year. We're talking like $900 billion a year. So we've got some big problems. And so the real hope here is, you need two parties. You want competition. And so you would hope that the Democrats start to develop an agenda that actually addresses real problems rather than fake ones, like a supposed increase of white supremacy.
I appreciate that I'm treading into the world of speculation, but we see of the Democrats, I see two big factions. One is the establishment types, like Hillary, Pelosi, who think the working people are deplorable and, like you say, they have contempt for people who don't have college degrees. And the other side is the AOC, the Squad, this kind of like basically far left progressives.
Right.
And Kamala, she was banging on about equity. I mean, that's neo-communism as far as I'm concerned. So do you see any talent in the Democrats? Because you presumably want a strong opposition or a strong competition at the next election. Yeah. Do you see any talent within the Democrats that you'd like to see coming through? What would be the best case scenario?
I mean, the person that people talk about, of course, is Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania. He does have a more moderate agenda. He's more like Fetterman. I mean, the person was, Fetterman, the senator from Pennsylvania. So you see them coming out of the places where they need to come out of as well. In other words, someone coming out of California is just probably not going to be a good match for Pennsylvania. We know that really they do need to compete for Pennsylvania. So you can see those two guys, and they're both emphasizing, more economic issues, more working class issues. That would be the obvious place for it to go. I think that they become, and I think Mark Kelly and these guys, more moderate Democrats, he's like this thing of just demonizing, Elon Musk and the space program. I mean, Mark Kelly's, the space.
Did he do that? He demonized Musk.
Well, No, I mean, Democrats are demonizing
generally.
those. Yeah. So in other words, and now they're going after SpaceX. I mean, in other words, the space program for the United States still has a kind of, inspiration and misty-eyed, dreamlike quality to it. So you get someone like Mark Kelly, it feels a little bit more transcendent. So, I think that's probably where it goes. But I think the big thing is, if you kind of follow Hobbes or some political scientists, where you kind of go, where's the real power center, or we might call the sovereign in any society? It really had been the media, arguably since George W. Bush was president. I think after 9/11 for a couple of years, the power center was the White House, but it really quickly shifted to the media again. The media has been the sovereign. The media is the one that can decide what the state of exception is, the state of emergency is.
Yeah.
The media fragmentation, the self-destruction of the Democrats, and then the use of social media means that I think that the sovereign and this huge victory for Trump, it now means that the power center in the United States has moved to the White House decisively, and arguably to the Republican Party, particularly if they control the House. But if you have Republicans controlling both houses and the executive branch, clearly the Republican Party is the center of power at that point, and the media, as you said, it was already alienating people. I mean, the final straw was when they were telling us to our face that Biden was fine, and then a couple days later tell us that he had to go. I mean, that's the sort of gaslighting that really destroys trust.
Not talking about him at all. I mean, this is a man who...
Yeah, you forgot he was president.
Dr. Drew on the show said he almost certainly has Parkinson's. I mean, in fact, there's no chance he doesn't have Parkinson's with the symptoms for it. Now, on the media.
Yeah.
So one Gallup poll, I think from last month, showed that not only Republicans trust mass media at a sort of 10% trust to 12% trust, but Democrats themselves, it's fallen to like 52%. You and I, the success you've had at Public is because of media failure.
Absolutely.
You're just filling in the gap of what they've done. Now you happen to do it superbly well, and so you have a trusted and huge audience. Not in America, but of course this year in Brazil as well. What's happening within mainstream media? Is it redeemable? Like, is it over? Is this the end?
Well, in some ways it's like we have to spend more time thinking about really what's going on with the media. I mean, of course, we've had social media now for 20 years, podcasting for that amount of time. YouTube has been around that amount of time. So on the one hand, you would think it shouldn't have such a big impact now, but clearly this was, you look at all the stuff that occurred this election. I mean, you saw, there's a couple of famous incidents where Kamala Harris was interviewed by CBS News for 60 Minutes. They did a teaser or an advertisement for her time on 60 Minutes where she was doing word salad and just not babbling incoherently. Then on 60 Minutes, they used a clip of her sounding more articulate. There was a bunch of calls, including from myself and former CBS News investigative reporter Catherine Herridge, saying, release the whole transcript. And they have not done that. They haven't released the whole transcript. They haven't released the whole film. Well, that just looks like barbaric or archaic compared to sit down for a podcast with Joe Rogan or, Lex Friedman or somebody, or you for hour, 2-3 hours. The idea that you would record an hour-long interview and that you would then let the corporation that recorded the interview decide what the public saw, it just seems so old-fashioned. And then you saw the Trump campaign decided that, for a variety of reasons, that they were going to just do a fair number of pretty big podcasts, both with Trump and with his running mate, J.D. Vance. I think it's clear that it worked out very well for them. I think I could see it sort of have the impact on my wife, who's a Democrat and did not vote for Trump. But I could see it sort of softening her. It's hard to be like, that guy... It's easier if they're up there screaming at a rally, to be like, that guy looks like a fascist. But when they're sitting there
and they're talking tenderly into the microphone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But when you see them sitting down for 3 hours and just talking about their lives or whatever, I think that had a big impact. I think J.D. Vance went to the next level with the debate by humanizing it, which is another important blow against wokeism, which is so dehumanizing.
Yeah. But he's a talent, and he could be the next. Republicans really could be in power for the next 12 years. I mean,
that's clearly,
he's not the only talent, but we'll come back to that.
That's right.
The CBS story isn't quite finished with that, because Trump has now said he's going to sue them for $10 billion for the editing of the interview that they did with Kamala Harris, and not only that, for defaming him somehow. Is that not a problem for free speech? You're one of the prominent free speech activists and journalists in America. Surely this is outrageous to you.
Well, sure. I mean, it's silly. It's not. We have a very high bar for defamation, in contrast to our friends across the pond who have a much lower bar for defamation. So yeah, I mean, it's. I'm not. The reason I'm not that alarmed by it is that I think it's going to be thrown out. It's not going to go anywhere.
But isn't the principle, like the spirit of doing it against the spirit of the First Amendment?
It is because 60 Minutes. They didn't defame him even. It was just they're being manipulative. They're being sneaky.
It was damaging to his elections.
I mean, if he had lost, then, but there still would not have been a case. And I'm not, the reason also it's not as interesting is the sense that that's just not going to be an issue anymore. I mean, you're just going to go into every campaign and, with the similar, so we had a previous media technological revolution in 1960 when John F. Kennedy defeated Richard Nixon in a televised debate. That showed that you needed to be able to do a televised debate. And you had to look good and you had to kind of present well, and like Nixon's makeup was wrong and whatnot. Well, now you get to this era, and if you're going to be a serious candidate, you have to be able to sit down with Joe Rogan and talk for a significant amount of time. You can't do word salad for 3 hours. Yeah. You've got to really be able to talk about things in an authentic way. So, I mean, I can't help but feel enormously optimistic about that technological revolution, particularly when you compare it to television, which in some ways made communications kind of more superficial but this is making it much more profound, much deeper. And so that's why it's kind of like, suing CBS, like 2-4 years from now, that's all gone. Like no one's even going to think that because you're going to...
You think it's actually gone?
It's just because the media, I mean, the media will still be there. In the same way that we have radio still and we have telegraphs, but it's just like it's not where the center of action is. And if you wanted any additional proof that this has been the election of social media and podcasting, and I would say particularly X and podcasting, just look at Joe Rogan's last minute endorsement of Donald Trump. I mean, it was national news that he endorsed. I was surprised. A lot of people were surprised that he endorsed Trump. I was less surprised, but I was amazed by how it's like Joe Rogan's endorsement. I mean, he's a podcaster. I mean, he's a lovely person. I respect the hell out of him and, enjoy talking to him. But it's a major endorsement, and it's also different from the past in that Walter Cronkite would never have done an endorsement. It was studiously. So we're in a totally different environment now where there's no limitations of like bandwidth or the amount of time that you have, or it's like, well, we have to create the sound bites. Yeah. It's just a full open, you can see, and over many months, I mean, you have candidates that will end up doing hundreds of hours now of podcasts. Yeah. I think it also diminishes the ability of the attack ads. It used to be, you can say one thing off and then they turn it into an ad. And of course they'll be able to do that. But I think when you have the public seeing somebody engaging for so many hours on so many topics, I think it's a little bit harder to kind of create a caricature of them, cartoon picture of them in your mind that was much more possible on television.
The endorsement from Rogan was so big that Trump himself thanked Rogan in his acceptance speech last night.
Amazing.
So he thanked a podcaster in his acceptance speech last night. Now,
and then we should talk about Elon too, because I think that's another major event.
But before we do that, I think it's related to this.
Yeah,
is that in 2016 we talked about how he was a Twitter president and he used Twitter and social media.
Right.
Now it's podcasting, like you mentioned, but podcasting has to go through various platforms, especially, well, not least YouTube. YouTube owned by Google. YouTube in this campaign, we watched the most egregious example of this, and by this I mean manipulation of searching, was after the assassination attempt. You could not look up Donald Trump assassination attempt. It diverted you elsewhere. Are you concerned about the power now, particularly of Google and YouTube, this massive monopoly in the field and their ability to control how Americans think?
Well, I mean, absolutely. I mean, because I think if you think about it, like before the internet, and it was just printing presses, or even before television or before radio, and printing presses were just much more decentralized. When the Catholic Church cracked down on them in Western Europe, they moved the printing presses to the Netherlands. They printed the pamphlets and they moved them out throughout Europe, so you could actually escape some amount of state control with printing presses. if everybody's getting their information from three big corporations, and those corporations are essentially captured either by deep state agencies like CIA, FBI, or DHS, or they're captured by woke NGOs or some alliance between those two sets of institutions, it's absolutely terrifying. It's 1984. It's exactly what, there's even a little, I think it is Church, or it's another senator, maybe it was Asimov, I can't remember. There's been warnings of this moment from like decades past that if you get to this communications revolution, that actually it would be easier to control speech, not harder. So that's absolutely a concern. Now, we now have seen some big developments. You see Rumble is formed, you see Substack is formed, and those allow alternatives. But then the major event, of course, is Elon Musk purchasing X, which is the equivalent of, it's hard to compare it to anything in the past, but I kind of compare it to at first for the first 100 years, the Catholic Church loved the printing press, the Gutenberg movable type metal. They loved the printing press. It was great for the Catholic Church. They were able to produce much more. They were thrilled. Well, then this guy named Martin Luther comes along and creates these theses, hammers them on the door, and they get reproduced widely throughout Europe. And suddenly the Catholic Church is like, wait, this technology is not something that we can control. I think that when you get Elon Musk buying X and he opens up the platform, reduces the restrictions on it, gets the deep state out of the content moderation, out of the censorship, it was game changing, and so that's all before you get to Elon Musk putting a huge amount of money and campaigning literally on the ground for Trump in Pennsylvania. Meanwhile, he's a character who obviously is one of our biggest defense contractors. He's 90% of space launches are SpaceX. He's doing things that nobody else can do. So you could just have there's like a whole separate conversation about just this character of Elon Musk. I think it's it's
an amazing character because on the right, or the MAGA supporters, which include actually old liberals, he is a hero, and on the left, he is now chief villain.
Oh, yeah.
Probably because he's the most threatening person to the progressive worldview and establishment, more even than Trump, because he's much younger for a start.
Yeah.
What do we make of Elon Musk? And the thing that he always said himself was that if they don't win, they're going to lock him up. They're going to come after him. Now, I didn't fully buy that because the government had lots of contracts with SpaceX, and his business is functioning. If they've collapsed, that's a huge part of the American economy collapsing. Do you think Elon was right to think that? It felt a little bit hyperbolic to me.
You wouldn't necessarily, but he also then revealed on Rogan, just whatever it was, 2 or 3 nights ago, that there was a huge team of attorneys at Department of Justice that have been going after him for this issue of not hiring foreign workers, or not hiring when in fact he was restricted in the workers he could hire for national security reasons, because there's certainly national security activities you can't have foreign workers on. So he was arguing that he's in a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. I don't know the details of it, so I don't want to speculate about it. But yeah, I don't know. Look, we just saw in Brazil that, they confiscated all the SpaceX assets in Brazil. Your point is right, though. They just depend so heavily on SpaceX. Arguably, the only person in the world that could have liberated Twitter into a free speech platform was Elon Musk. Right. He's the only person you really can't go after because he's the only person that knows how to land a rocket back in its. It's so funny. Like the last few weeks and months, while the world's freaking out about the elections and about misinformation or hate speech online, Elon's literally landing a rocket for the first time. So it's an incredible story. I think the other thing is that he's a reminder that entrepreneurialism is this. It is the heart of capitalism. It's really the heart of the United States. Here you have characters in the United States' history. Henry Ford, Thomas Edison, Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, where they're when they get described, it's almost like they're like a force of nature. The famous expression from Joseph Schumpeter, the great economist, was creative destruction. These people. They're not just inventing things. They're not just businessmen. They're entrepreneurs. So they're doing all of these things. And so I think part of the woke left story, which comes out of Marxism, is that no, they're just thieves. They're just exploiting their workers. Yeah. It's the most absurd story when you think about it, because of course, the idea that this rocket would have done this, with Elon Musk not there, you sometimes see it online. People say things like, oh, well, there's other people at SpaceX that do these things. But no, it takes this particular demanding, driving, aggressive, and often very abrasive and difficult people to drive these things through, because, engineers will fall in love with their solutions and bureaucrats will step in. So I think it's just been this huge affirmation of what makes this particular combination of liberal democracy and capitalism so powerful, so it's like there's never been a combination of political and economic systems like we have, in the West in general, but in the United States in particular. And you can see it because Europe, there's just nothing going on in terms of like new tech companies. All the action is over here.
Yeah.
I pointed out this morning, it's like maybe if the European Union had spent less time trying to censor misinformation and more time trying to attract real entrepreneurs or getting AI going or something, we wouldn't be here where we are now. So you see, I think at this moment,
Europeans are moving to America. The aspirational and the entrepreneurial are moving to America. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, it's fine. But so you kind of get this, on the one hand, this repudiation of this just toxic, racialist, sexist, reductive, dehumanizing the agenda form of woke totalitarianism. But then you also get a repudiation of kind of this big government, not just socialism, but really even kind of social democratic system with a very high taxes. I'm traditionally very sympathetic to social democratic systems because I like people having universal health care. I think it's important to take care of your people. But the action's all in the United States once again. And so I think that for those of us that have been concerned about civilization in general and about the United States in particular, it's hard. It's impossible not to feel optimistic about this country. I mean, we're just sitting on huge quantities of oil and gas. We've got the best innovators and inventors in the world. We're doing all of the interesting stuff on artificial intelligence here. This America is back, and it's back in a big way, is what I would say.
Just listening to you speak there, I've worked it out why I feel the same sort of catharsis and the same sort of relief. And it's not actually necessarily anger directed at the woke nonsense and all that crap. It's like, it's okay to celebrate being aspirational again.
Yeah.
It's okay to celebrate entrepreneurs. It's okay to look up, to dream up. That's what's so exciting about this. You mentioned earlier Elon's landing the rocket. That's not an accident. That happened a couple of weeks ago. Like, this is all part of the same culture of this movement. That we feel like it's okay to dream big. And in Britain now, we're so buggered. Mm-hmm. Like, it's total poppy syndrome turbocharged.
Yep.
Just all about bringing people. Our best are leaving. They're moving here to America. You're taking all our best.
Right.
And it might be a case that I hope Trump will grant political asylum because free speech is down the drain. But that's a conversation.
If you need me to advocate for you to get political asylum, I'll be there for you.
But
you see this picture of a kind of, the United States is still wants to reach for the stars. It still is aiming upwards. Even with the decline of traditional religions, we get this replacement of this incredible space program, this ambition, this aspiration. And in Europe, you just feel pulled down by the bureaucrats, by the EU. It's just got this heaviness to it. All they can do is talk about constraining things, and literally after decades of green talk, of degrowth, that's what they're getting in Germany.
Yeah.
But even there, apparently the coalition is now completely falling apart. We're seeing the center-right party, which just 5 minutes ago had demonized the so-called far-right party as basically fascist and Nazi adjacent. They're now embracing an end to mass migration and calling for deportation. So I think there's been and I think, because we love it because Americans, because we're, we kind of, other people from around the world pay a lot of attention to our elections, and we think, well, that's how it should be because we affect so many people. But you do get a sense that this change here is going to have significant ripple effects for years to come.
It's the same feeling I have about Salvador with Bukele and Argentina. It's like no matter how bad it gets, you have these future-looking, Bukele's a sort of techno-capitalist and Milei is just, I guess, an old-school anarchist capitalist and anarcho-capitalist, as they'd say. So it feels like no matter how bad it gets, there can be a turnaround. Do you see this MAGA as a sort of glorious revolution in the same populist vein as we've seen in Latin America?
Well, yeah, and also, I mean, the other person you'd mentioned, and that's important to mention, is Giorgia Meloni. or is that saying right? Is it Georgia
Meloni
Giorgia Meloni
in Italy? Yeah.
Of Italy. I believe she's one of the most popular political leaders in Europe. She's. I also noticed, like, when they were talking about favorability towards Trump, Italians were more favorable. She's working inside. She had to moderate some of her views. She's working inside political constraints. Milei and, as also, I'm assuming, working within some political constraints. Bukele probably a little bit less. But we're now, you and I were part of a conversation a few nights ago where I was sort of pointing out that, we've got to understand that the right is going to be in political constraints too in the United States. It's not like they're going to be able to get everything that they want. And so I think whatever ideological differences they might say in advance, they're all operating within a particular context. But yeah, I mean, I think that, look, you say, until a few weeks ago, nationalist populism was being treated by respectable people around the world as just fascist and as completely anathema to liberal democracy. And here it's basically been affirmed by a majority of Americans.
Yeah.
Not like everyone's kind of thinking about what that means exactly, or that they're reading, Roger, Scruton or whatever, but you get a sense, like people were saying, we're reorienting back to the nation state as a coherent place for organization.
It's nationalist in that it's sovereigntist, it's about the nation state, and it's populist in that it's against the failure of the elites, those elites who have failed.
Yes.
Back to Elon Musk.
Yeah.
He is going to be heading, or so he has said, the Department of Government Efficiency, so named after his favorite meme coin. What do you expect from Doge in action? And is it something to be excited about? Is it something to be concerned about? I mean, we don't like it when big business and big government are in cahoots, I thought. Or is this acceptable for some reason? Is it okay that he can head all these big businesses and be working in the government?
Everything that was said up until Election Day is now, they're starting with a completely blank piece of paper. There's some ideas, there's some transition team, but there's nothing is going to be solidified. We have no idea. There was speculation about what would be the role of Bobby Kennedy. Well, everybody knows Bobby Kennedy is supposedly against fossil fuels. You saw Trump get up last night and he said, I love Bobby. He's going to do whatever he wants.
My liquid gold.
Yeah, he's going to do whatever he wants, but we're going to do a lot of oil drilling. I mean, Elon is obviously, somebody who's a big chunk of his business is in batteries and electric cars. So he's, got obviously those interests. Look, I mean, Trump's going to have a chief of staff. He's going to have, a Senate majority leader. He's going to have a Speaker of the House. He's going to have a ton of people talking in his ear. We know that he's somebody that is an intuitive player and often is moved by the last person in the room. And so there's going to be some of that chaos there. But no, I mean, look, I think that the executive branch can do quite a bit in terms of shrinking government. And even when you can't do the full civil service reform, which is basically, getting rid of a lot of departments, which may require some congressional approval. It's just not totally clear yet. You can still, clean house, and so there's two questions. There's sort of the size of government, and then there's the quality of government. And, I think the other dirty little secret that no one really talks about is that, a much larger share. I mean, really, if you're going to reduce that debt by cuts, you're going to have to reduce entitlements. And then you're going to be in the same issue that, Emmanuel Macron has famously been in, of you're going to have to either raise the retirement age or raise the retirement age for people that have been doing manual labor, which is probably the most reasonable version of it. That's how you change that. Now, Trump has not talked about doing significant cuts. He's talking about Elon's going to come in and make government more efficient, but mostly what Trump has said is that we're just going to have a higher rate of growth, because if you grow the pie, then that reduces the overall share of the debt. But it's an open question. I mean, I think that debt is now so large that it is actually impeding, it is getting in the way of things. I mean, it's just a second defense budget, essentially.
A few people are predicting that there is a looming crash around the corner, and it could happen any moment, really. And Balaji Srinivasan says there's a $175 trillion debt crisis going on in America. That's high. Have you looked into that at all?
I mean, only the basics. I mean, look, it's it's one of these things where it's a relative problem. And so one thing is you kind of compare the United States to other countries. So, our treasuries, our bonds, the source of our debt, heavily owned by China. They may have reduced some of their exposure, but it's not like in China's interest for them to start dumping, or selling those treasury bonds. So we're all very interlinked still. It is still a very globally tied up economy. We're so far from being able to, we have really not repatriated, almost no manufacturing, for being really honest. Very little manufacturing has come back. When it does come back, it's going to be more expensive. Those products are going to be more expensive than what we're making them in China. Is there going to be a debt crisis? Is there going to be some sort of restructuring? There might be, where basically the debt gets reduced to some fraction of the dollar and the bankers have to take a haircut, some sort of new social compact, like after 2008, 2009, when people felt like Obama gave the bankers everything they wanted and no consequences. It could happen. I mean, it just seems like the debt is at such a large size. On the other hand, at a certain point, the creditors have an interest in some sort of solution where they're going to, if not be made whole, then they're not going to lose their shirts and they're not going to be stuck in a recession, because obviously you don't want to make solving the debt. I mean, Trump does not. Trump and J.D. Vance Republicans certainly do not want to have a recession if they can avoid it.
Yeah, this is the thing that despite your wonderful white pill earlier about what this means for America, we remember how something completely unpredictable can tear it all down. It was COVID, the last year of Trump's last election, and I'm sure listeners can imagine loads of times when just things go completely unexpected. So whatever we say, no matter what the white pill might be, we can only really speculate about what's around the corner, and it might, of course, be a Trump disaster. There's one bit of your white pill that I would like to push back on, if I may. It seems that you've implied, if not explicitly, then implicitly, that the woke stuff is kind of over. Now, I don't think it is. So, for example, Kamala Harris in her speech said that the spirit that animated her campaign was still alive and well, and she'd never give up on that, even though she's conceding the election. And I remember, of course, when Trump was last president, we had Me Too, which 2018, which included them storming the Capitol. People seem to have memory hold of that. Mm-hmm. We had the DEI takeover of institutions and businesses across America. We had the cities burning. We've touched on that in this conversation. We had all of the BLM movement, Antifa. We had a lot of environmental nonsense that we've discussed before in previous conversations. Is it not? It seems likely to me that now that Trump's in with this huge cast of people that the left hate so much, that they're going to come back, and all of these energies, why would they stop fighting now? If they think Trump is la 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 la, as the saying goes, why would they stop fighting now? You think you're going to exhaust them?
Well, I think, you're absolutely right. We have two competing mythologies in the United States. One of them is wokeism, and the other one is basic pro-American, pro-civilization, liberal, democratic Enlightenment tradition. The wokeism is anti-modern, anti-enlightenment, dehumanizing, anti-individualist. It's progressive in the sense that it involves this kind of over-involvement of the state in people's lives. It's not progressive in the sense that's often aimed at slowing the economy or reducing growth. They're two competing moral visions. And so that's the contest right now. But I do think that wokeism as a public hysteria peaked in the summer of 2020. I would say, if I had to pinpoint a moment, I would say it was the moment the public health officials who had just told everybody to stay indoors and not go outside, and they shut down the schools, the moment they said you have to go outside and protest with Black Lives Matter, which just was the peak, wokeism. I think the peak censorship moment was spring of 2022 when Barack Obama advocated for censorship at Stanford. Where are we now? Well, we're only 2 years out of that, or 2 to 4 years away from that. Wokeism took a long time to grow. It's probably been a slow decline since then. I think that the fever has broken. The trance has lifted. The hypnotic power of wokeism, where there would be no dialogue. You just had to do it. And the resistance was dangerous. There's just safety in numbers now. There's a lot of us that have been canceled. We're finding each other. We're friends. We're making, podcasts and books and careers out of figuring out what happened. So when I was black pilling, up until to a few weeks ago, it's sort of the sense in which wokeism is the future, and that it is the successor ideology, to borrow from Wes Yang's, I think, really apt term, that this is what comes after the Enlightenment, I think don't count the Enlightenment out. I mean, the Enlightenment's been going on for a while. It's pretty darn good. I mean, there's interesting philosophical challenges there's certainly cultural and political challenges to it. But I mean, this basic combination of liberal democracy and free market capitalism, it still produces tons and tons of winners and tons of growth. And I mean, Trump was elected, and I think the Dow Jones increased by something like 1,500 points, which is
Bitcoin's got to max its highest ever level.
Right. So you sort of
The
go.
markets love it.
The markets are happy. So everybody just got a little richer, with the Trump. So never underestimate greed. It does have the potential to Trump envy.
One aspect I've known about the kind of the what would you say, the dam being busted a little bit on it culturally okay to speak out against wokeism is it's okay now to openly support Trump, even though when Trump won in 2016, you wouldn't really meet anyone openly. They'd be very brave and to speak out in support of Trump. Now we're in New York speaking now. I've seen several people walk in the streets with MAGA hats and red hats and confidently, and they're not bothered.
Right.
And they're not also it's not just working people. I've certainly seen, construction worker types with MAGA hats, but I've seen trendy hipsters with them on. It's almost become, I can't quite believe it's become cool to be a conservative. I don't even think, can you call him a conservative? Maybe they say they're conservative.
Certainly on the right.
We've
definitely seen that. And I think it's like you said, the young men the growing support for young men on the right and for Trump and for Republicans, that's got to be viewed by Democrats as a significant threat. I think it's also, we haven't talked about it, but I mean, we're seeing this return of positive masculinity. We see these characters emerging as positively masculine men. Joe Rogan, Jordan Peterson. I was with Jonathan.
Michael Shellenberger.
Stop it. Winston Marshall. I was with Jonathan Haidt last night, who has sort of raised concerns in a fatherly way or avuncular way about the effect of social media on kids. Andrew Huberman, Peter Attia, you see a kind of manosphere. But these are not manly men in the ways of the 1950s, of John Wayne, for example. But they're also not these sort of effeminate men like Alan Alda or Richard Dreyfuss who are just all about empathy. There's what's that?
Tim Walz.
Tim Walz, yeah. So there's a new kind of masculinity and manliness that's being elevated. The hipster, right, young men, they're reading things like Bronze Age Pervert. They're reading Nietzsche. They're coming back to the Roman Empire. I mean, you said the Mark Zuckerberg rebrand. He says, I'm into the Roman Empire, and he's got a kind of, F you, devil may care attitude, which tells you a lot because we've all been feeling this fishbowl effect and feeling self-conscious. The cool guy is now emerging as somebody who doesn't care. He doesn't, as Joe Rogan is in that sense really been a model because he says, I don't care what people say. Yeah. So in a sense,
Jeff Bezos is in there as well.
Yes.
He's absolutely ripped at the moment. And not only that, he doesn't care trying to turn around the Washington Post. This ties into what we were talking about the mainstream media earlier. Right. He has lost 200,000 subscribers for the audacity to try and make Washington Post a neutral publication. That's right. Again, that's only because he doesn't care.
Well, yeah. And so you sort of see the return of the CEO. And then you sort of seen the return of the entrepreneur, a reassertion of their power in the organizations against the staff, which got out of control. One of the best essays of the last 2 years is this incredible essay called The Longhouse that was in First Things.
I hear that word all the time. I don't know the term Longhouse.
I encourage your readers to go read it. It's a stunning essay. It's very short, by the way. It takes like 5 minutes to read it. The Longhouse is an old indigenous kind of, it's a long house. I mean, it's a primitive indigenous home that was kind of dominated by a den mother. So it's very matriarchal. It's very, it's very thick in there. It's very, what would you say, yin energy. It's very feminine energy. Yeah. It's very, I think, the men are out there hunting and, fixing things outside or whatever. And the women are in there kind of getting overly, it's toxic femininity, and it's what happens to these organizations. They become disproportionately female. The kind of organizations where the HR person has way too much power and she's imposing DEI, and they're flagging concerns all the time. And I'm concerned about the way you said this or the way this person felt. And the whole mission, to put satellites out there or or to, ship products or to do news gathering. I mean, journalism in its earliest form, you even see in the old Hollywood movies, it's very masculine. It's very aggressive. It's very assertive. In fact, I'm blanking on the name of it, but it's a great one with Cary Grant, an early one where there's a woman in it. It's one of the screwball comedies. They talk a mile a minute. She's very
screwball comedies.
It's a screwball comedy between them. They talk very fast, and I'm blanking on the name, but listeners can put it in the comments. But she's very aggressive and manly, and she's, it's Dorothy Parker. I mean, even Maureen Dowd in her earliest, parts of it are really masculine. I mean, we see with Barry Weiss is now maybe the most important and influential media entrepreneur now, the most exciting media entrepreneur. She's very assertive, and she makes her mark by being assertive and bringing a kind of masculine energy in revolt against the Longhouse. So, I mean, this recalibration of masculinity and femininity were the only thing that when masculinity was used in conversation up until very recently, it was only prefaced with toxic. It was only toxic masculinity. You never heard people talk about toxic femininity. You never heard people talk about positive masculinity. But now I think a couple of years into it, we see the most influential person in journal, in podcasting. We see this influential person in journalism, and it's not just men that are masculine, but we can also see it in women in the same way that you can have some femininity in men. So it feels like we're coming back to some back to basics, some rebalancing of things that got completely out of whack.
Oh, that was a big part of the election. I mean, there was this deliberate attempt and theme to bring down men with testosterone. Dana Bash said it at the DNC. She was trying to appeal to low T men. That's why you had characters like Walls and Doug Emhoff, and it was anti the Rogan, anti the manosphere, as she describes it. It seemed like that maybe that the Kamala election campaign was one last attempt to pull down toxic masculinity. And you know what? Women voted against that, I think.
They did.
Actually, it turns out women like masculine men. It turns out women want real men in their lives.
Well, and of course, and that's the secret that no one likes talking about. They like it in the bedroom too. So
yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's interesting that the only nickname that stuck in this election was Tampon Tim. And it's not just that it was on the most effeminate man in the race, but it's literally a feminine product.
Yeah.
And they couldn't quite figure out how to properly characterize Kamala. She was sort of, because she's, word salad, there's no there.
Tampon Tim was perfect.
But Tampon Tim just kind of
summed up the whole campaign.
And it's funny about it because everyone's sort of waiting, Trump has to come up with the thing, but I think that the Tampon Tim thing just came probably from X, or just came from the ether. So you start to see also this, I think there's more awareness now that there's a new right that has formed, and it's not, I don't think that it's the Daily Wire plus. I mean, you kind of go, it's Daily Wire, it's Joe Rogan, it's the Free Press. And then you even have these adjacent, leftists like Lee Fong, and, you see Glenn Greenwald had 1 foot in on some issues, 1 foot out on the others, Matt Taibbi, me, where we're kind of we're part of it, and we want to kind of have a say in where it goes. But we're also it's somewhat on the edges of it, and I think but that makes it larger. Then, in other words, if it's
larger, it makes it larger, but it's not a group of ideas and people that share that much in common, except for their abhorrence for totalitarian elitism and basically what the Democrat establishment have.
Well, we could probably go a little farther. I mean, there's a concept in linguistics called family resemblance, which is that, sometimes you look at a photo of a family. You might look at like a photo of a family, you might pick out 2 members of that family and go, wow, they don't look anything alike. But if you kind of look at the whole family, you can start to see these kind of traits and characteristics in them. So I think you do see that. I might go a little further and say, I do think it's still grounded in Enlightenment philosophy. I think it's mostly liberal, lowercase liberal, meaning committed to liberal democracy, free speech, free expression. I think it's committed to the Constitution.
Yeah.
I'm working on a part of the book right now, which talks about...
You haven't actually told listeners about the book. I know about the book.
Yeah.
You've mentioned the book once already in this conversation. Can you tell us, seeing as you've mentioned it, what you're exactly working on?
I'm working on a book with my colleague, Alex Gutentag. The book is Pathocracy: Why Elites Subvert Civilization. my books are always about the subtitle, and I'm always asking a question in the subtitle that I want to answer. Like, why are they doing that?
Yeah.
Because it's a paradox. I mean, when I say elites, I mean the top 10 to 30% of the society. They're the most educated. They live the best lives. They're the most prosperous. So why in the world are they're not free? Why are they undermining the basic pillars of civilization, by which I mean meritocracy, law and order, equal justice under the law, free speech, cheap energy? You kind of go down the list. I mean, you could arguably say, family structure and, or protecting, the right to go through puberty. I mean, these things are all, all these things are really foundational. So why are they, going after it? I was working on one of the pieces of it gets at this issue of authoritarianism. And I discovered in this process that for years, academics have said that, a lot of the criticism of Trump is that it's authoritarian. And they sort of say, if you go look at Trump supporters and you ask them a bunch of questions on these surveys, they're higher in something called right-wing authoritarianism, which is this concept that's been around for 40 years. Well, there was a study done in 2018 that found that there was no relationship between your supposed right-wing authoritarianism and your support for the Constitution. And lo and behold, Republicans, including Trump supporters, have much stronger support for the Constitution than do liberals and Democrats. And it's Bernie Sanders and the radical left who most strongly agree with the statement that we should just ignore the Constitution. I mean, I remember as an ex-leftist, as an ex-radical leftist, having a very similar view, which was, why would we be constrained by this Constitution? I didn't really even understand that it is really the only thing in some ways that's holding us together. It is the software and hardware of our entire liberal democratic civilization. But anybody that wants to reject the Constitution is basically engaging in illiberal authoritarian politics, because you're not allowed. You can do laws, but you can't go outside the Constitution, or the Supreme Court prevents it, right? So I think one of the things is so how do you get the elites turning against constitutional, liberal Republican democracy? What's going on there? And coming to some similar places that I've come to in the other books around, the rise of nihilism and decadence and the professional managerial class.
Yeah. Well, that's very exciting. We've talked about so much, and I'm sure we could talk at least twice the amount of time. It's always a pleasure to speak with you.
Always a pleasure,
Michael,
Winston.
my friend. Michael Shellenberger. Listeners and viewers will find you on Public, of course. What else are you excited about? What else should we direct their attention towards?
I mean, well, boy, these are exciting times. I mean, I don't even know what to say. I mean, we're going to see big changes on everything, including on the environment. So I was happy to see that this cause I've been championing, which is to save the whales off the East Coast from this big industrial wind farm. Trump himself in the podcast, I had people emailing me and go, "Did you know that Trump just said that he wants to be a whale psychiatrist or whale psychologist?" I was like, "What?" So we're hopeful. I mean, yeah, we've done a lot on it. I mean, we're hopeful to see some significant, reforms and soon, like early next year.
Yeah. Well, fantastic. Michael Shellenberger, a pleasure as always to speak with you.
Pleasure to be with you.
Thanks for watching the Winston Marshall Show with Michael Shellenberger. If you want to support the show, all you have to do is press subscribe. If you press subscribe, I can have more wonderful guests like Michael discussing the issues that you want to hear about. But till next time, be well.